What happens when the man upholding the law becomes the one breaking it? That's not just a question, it was the headline that dominated every major news network across America the day Judge Marcus R. Hale lost control of his own courtroom. It started like any other high-profile case. Cameras lined the back wall, every seat filled with journalists, influencers, and curious citizens hoping for a glimpse of a modern-day gladiator match, United States versus Elon Musk. Accusations of stock manipulation, market abuse, and an alleged intent to destabilize the financial system. It was bold, dramatic, and possibly career-ending. But no one expected what would happen next. Inside the oak-paneled courtroom, sunlight poured through the tall windows like golden daggers, illuminating the tension that wrapped around everyone like a noose. Elon Musk sat quietly at the defense table, expression unreadable, his signature black jacket sharp as ever. He didn't look like a man on trial. He looked like a man who already knew the ending. Across from him sat Judge Marcus R. Hale, a towering figure in his 60s, known for his ruthless approach and zero-tolerance reputation. He adjusted his glasses, narrowed his eyes, and glanced at the legal briefs in front of him, not reading, but calculating. Then came the moment. A defense attorney, Cameron West, requested to present an additional piece of evidence, a simple motion that, under any other judge, would have been routine. But Hale slammed his gavel down hard. Denied. Irrelevant and inflammatory, he barked. The courtroom went still. Even the stenographer paused. Your Honor, Cameron said respectfully, the document directly contradicts the prosecution's timeline. It's critical to the defense. I said it's denied, Hale repeated. And if you question this court's authority again, Mr. West, I'll hold you in contempt. From that moment on, something felt off. The public had tuned in expecting drama, sure, but what they got was something else. The judge wasn't just firm. He was hostile. Unreasonably so. Every time Musk's legal team spoke, Hale cut them off. Every time the prosecution stumbled, Hale leaned in to help. Twitter exploded. Is this a trial or a takedown? Hale's clearly got it out for Musk. Corrupt much? This isn't justice. This is a vendetta. Yet the trial continued. And just when it seemed things couldn't get any more tense, it happened. A low beep echoed from someone's phone in the gallery. Hale shot up like he'd been burned. Who was that? He roared. Nobody moved. I said, who was that? A man in the third row, a tech reporter from San Francisco, sheepishly raised his hand. Sorry, Judge. It was just a Twitter notification. What's your name? Hale demanded. Kevin Lee. You're banned from this courtroom. Bailiff, escort Mr. Lee out. Permanently. Kevin stood to leave, visibly shaken, while murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. This wasn't judicial firmness. This was something else, something personal. Even Elon Musk, who had maintained a zen-like calm up to this point, turned to his lawyer and whispered something. Cameron nodded slowly. Something had changed in the room. For a split second, the courtroom wasn't sure who was on trial anymore. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? That night, as cameras followed Musk into a waiting Tesla outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Mr. Musk, do you feel you're being treated fairly? Are you worried the judge is biased? Do you think the system is rigged against you? Musk didn't stop walking, but his answer was clear, if you're paying attention, you already know. Those words hit the airwaves like lightning. Within hours, clips of Hale's courtroom behavior flooded TikTok, YouTube, and Reddit. Legal analysts began dissecting his rulings, comparing them to federal judicial standards. A former prosecutor tweeted. If this isn't judicial misconduct, I don't know what is. The man's gavel might as well be a hammer. The cracks had started showing. But what no one outside that courtroom knew was that this case wasn't just about Elon Musk, or even the American justice system. It was about revenge. 15 years earlier, a little-known federal judge lost everything in a failed investment with a startup that Musk backed, and that would be the beginning of his obsession. But we'll get to that. Right now, the country was watching. The courtroom had become a stage. And the man who once commanded total authority suddenly found his power slipping away, with every camera flash, every tweet, every whisper of doubt. Justice was supposed to be blind. But what happens when the judge himself refuses to see the truth? Stay tuned. Judge Marcus R. Hale had always prided himself on being a man of the law. To his colleagues, he was known as a workhorse, a man who never let personal feelings interfere with his decisions. His rulings were often swift, harsh, and unyielding. His name was respected, even feared, in the legal community. But behind that exterior of authority, there was something darker, a resentment that would slowly consume him. Hale had grown up in a modest family, the son of a factory worker and a stay-at-home mother in a small town in Ohio. His parents had taught him that hard work and determination were the keys to success. As a child, Hale had always been the quiet one, reserved, methodical, and observant. While his classmates chased after fleeting dreams, he focused on the facts. It was no surprise when he went on to attend a prestigious law school, emerging as a rising star in the legal world. But it wasn't just his intellect that set him apart. Hale had an uncanny ability to read people. He could size up a room in seconds, sense hidden motives, and anticipate every move before it happened. He was meticulous, precise, and, most importantly, relentless. He had learned early on that to survive in this world, he had to be better than everyone else. If that meant stepping on a few people along the way, so be it. Hale's rise to the bench had been swift and undeniable. He had quickly gained a reputation for delivering hard-hitting decisions that left no room for error. Those who worked with him admired his tenacity, though they were often wary of his cold, calculating nature. He wasn't interested in making friends. He was interested in power. But there was one man who had eluded him, the one person Hale could never best, Elon Musk. It wasn't always this way. In fact, when Hale first crossed paths with Musk, he was impressed. Musk was young, driven, and ambitious, qualities that Hale admired. The two had met years ago at a charity event, where Hale had been invited as a guest speaker. Musk, already a tech mogul in the making, was there to discuss his vision for the future of space exploration. Hale had been intrigued by his passion and bold ideas. But it was the venture that Musk had taken on in the early 2000s, the one that involved electric cars, that really set the stage for the animosity between them. At the time, Hale was still a rising star in the legal world, not yet sitting on the bench but working as a prosecutor. His biggest claim to fame was a high-profile case that involved a company accused of embezzlement. Hale had been tasked with representing the government, and he had poured his heart and soul into securing a conviction. The case had been a career-defining moment for him, until Musk's company, Tesla, made a move that Hale saw as a direct threat to his future. Musk, ever the visionary, had been in talks to invest in a groundbreaking project that would change the world, an electric car that could potentially disrupt the entire automotive industry. Hale saw it as a threat to his career in the legal world. If Tesla succeeded, it could shift the focus of investment, time, and resources away from traditional industries like oil, real estate, and manufacturing, industries that Hale had once hoped to represent. At the time, Hale was in the middle of making a major investment himself, one that he believed would set him up for life. It was a small, struggling tech company, one that Musk had refused to back. Hale had poured money into it, convinced that his business acumen would make him millions. But Musk's refusal to invest, and the eventual rise of Tesla, sent Hale's venture crashing to the ground. The loss stung. But it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that Musk had seen something Hale hadn't. Musk had made the right bet, while Hale had been left behind. The arrogance of the tech mogul, the way he had ignored Hale's advice, had left a scar that would never fully heal. From that day forward, Hale became obsessed with Musk. He couldn't let go of the idea that the world had chosen Musk over him, just as the courtroom had chosen other people over him throughout his career. Every time Musk made a bold move, a new business venture, a groundbreaking achievement, Hale felt a surge of anger. It was as if the universe had handed Musk the keys to success while Hale was left standing in the shadows. And so, when the opportunity came to preside over Musk's trial, Hale saw it as his chance for redemption. This wasn't just another case, it was his shot at revenge. He was going to make Musk pay for every time he had been overlooked, every slight he had ever suffered. And in doing so, he would show the world that he, Marcus R. Hale, was not to be underestimated. But there was more to Hale's motivation than just pride. Over the years, Hale had become disillusioned with the justice system itself. He had seen how money and power could manipulate the law, how influential figures like Musk could bypass the system with their wealth and influence. Hale had witnessed firsthand how corrupt the system could be, how some people could walk free while others paid the price for their mistakes. Musk, with his endless stream of cash and global influence, represented everything that was wrong with the system. To Hale, Musk was a symbol of the corruption he despised. And now, Hale had the power to do something about it. But he had underestimated the reach of Musk's influence, and the resilience of those who fought for justice. What Hale didn't realize was that, as he aimed to destroy Musk's empire, he was setting in motion his own downfall. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a battle. A battle between a man who thought he could control the system, and a man who had built his empire by breaking all the rules. The gavel had come down hard, and Marcus R. Hale's fate as a judge was sealed. Or so he thought. But what he didn't account for was the storm that was brewing outside his courtroom. As soon as news of the trial went viral, the public reacted in a way that no one could have predicted. Hale's actions had crossed a line, not just for the defense but for the very people who relied on the justice system to hold everyone accountable, regardless of their stature. Musk's legal team, led by Cameron West, a sharp, seasoned attorney, wasn't the only one frustrated with Hale's behavior. In the legal community, whispers began to grow into an uproar. The actions of a single judge could tear apart the fragile fabric of trust between the people and the courts. Some lawyers were outraged. Others saw an opportunity. A coalition of powerful figures, a mix of former politicians, judges, and some of Musk's biggest competitors, had begun to quietly rally behind the idea of taking down Judge Hale. This was not just about one case anymore. It was about sending a message: no one, no matter how powerful or untouchable, was beyond reproach. But there was one group that made a difference in this growing movement. They weren't rich, powerful, or famous. They were just everyday citizens who believed in the system, citizens who were watching a judge lose himself to personal vendettas and prejudice. And they wanted to see change. Emma Blake, a young law professor from California, was one of those people. She had been following the trial closely, and the more she saw of Hale's behavior, the more she began to question everything she had been taught about the integrity of the judicial system. "I don't care how big the case is," she told her colleagues, as they gathered to discuss the trial in a university seminar room. "What matters is that we uphold the truth. We can't let personal bias come into play. The moment we lose that, we lose everything." Her words hit home for many of her peers. And before long, a movement began to form, spearheaded by law students, legal activists, and disillusioned citizens. They would not let the system bend to the will of one man, especially not a judge with such a clear conflict of interest. As Emma's group started to gain momentum, they reached out to Elon Musk, hoping to get his support. Musk, ever the unconventional figure, agreed to meet with them privately, understanding that this wasn't just about his case anymore. "What you're doing is bigger than me," Musk told them, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of everything that was at stake. "This isn't just about me going to court. It's about making sure people like me, and everyone else, are held accountable. We can't let the system be manipulated. We can't let a judge with a grudge dictate the outcome. But there was more to it than just Musk's fight for justice. He had a different motivation, a desire for transparency and accountability that extended far beyond his courtroom drama. His decision to back Emma's movement sent shockwaves through the media. The people who had once seen Musk as a controversial figure, distrustful of his larger-than-life persona, began to view him in a new light. They saw him as someone who was not only willing to fight for himself but for the future of the system as a whole. As the public response to Hale's behavior grew, the pressure on the judge became insurmountable. Legal professionals who had once turned a blind eye to his methods were now questioning whether he was fit to preside over high-profile cases. Even members of Hale's own judicial circle began to distance themselves from him. His once sturdy reputation, built over decades of rulings, was now crumbling. But Hale wasn't one to back down easily. Behind closed doors, he was determined to maintain control, to salvage whatever authority he had left. He leaned on his most trusted confidant, Lydia Freeman, a senior court officer who had been by his side for years. Lydia was fiercely loyal, almost to a fault. She had seen Hale at his best and worst, and she had always believed in his ability to weather any storm. But now, as the tides turned against him, she wasn't so sure. "You can't fight this alone, Marcus," Lydia warned him as they sat in his chambers late one night, reviewing case files. "The entire system is watching you now. If you're not careful, they'll tear you down before you can even make your next move." Hale's jaw clenched. "I didn't ask for their approval, Lydia. This is about justice. This is about making sure someone like him doesn't get to skate through life without paying the price for his actions." "But you've crossed a line," Lydia said quietly. "This isn't about the law anymore. This is personal." He shot her a cold look. "And when has personal never mattered? Justice is supposed to be blind, but the truth is, we all have our biases. I'm just the only one brave enough to act on them." Lydia didn't respond. She had seen this side of him before, the side that craved vindication more than anything else. But deep down, she knew that Hale was playing a dangerous game, and the consequences would be catastrophic. As the days passed, Hale's hold on the case, and his power, began to slip. Emma Blake's coalition began rallying in earnest, and the pressure was mounting. Musk's legal team wasn't backing down either. With each new revelation of Hale's bias, the case against him grew stronger. But what Hale didn't anticipate was the growing number of voices calling for his resignation. It wasn't just about Elon Musk anymore. It was about the sanctity of the judicial system itself. People wanted a system that was fair, transparent, and free from the corruption of personal vendettas. The battle for justice had officially begun. But in Hale's mind, it wasn't just about defending his career, it was about proving that he could win at any cost, even if that meant sacrificing everything he had worked for. Judge Marcus R. Hale thought he was in control. He'd weathered storms before, navigated the volatile seas of high-profile cases with a steady hand. But this time, the tide was different. The storm wasn't something that could be managed with courtroom tactics or legal jargon, it was a wave of public outrage, a growing chorus of voices demanding accountability. The first crack in Hale's armor came from an unexpected place, the media. In the days following the court's decision to ban the journalist for his harmless tweet, public opinion shifted rapidly. The coverage of the trial, initially focused on the legal battle between Musk and the prosecution, was now entirely centered on Hale's behavior. Legal analysts, political commentators, and even retired judges began weighing in, and their consensus was clear: Hale's actions were not just biased, they were unlawful. "There's a difference between tough rulings and an abuse of power," one legal expert said in a televised interview. "The actions we've seen in Judge Hale's courtroom go beyond just being a harsh disciplinarian. He's actively manipulating the proceedings. This isn't justice. This is personal vendetta, and it has no place in a court of law." The backlash spread like wildfire, fueled by social media. Memes mocking Hale's behavior circulated endlessly. Hashtags like #HaleHasToGo and #JusticeForMusk trended for days, giving the impression that Hale was not only a bad judge but a symbol of everything wrong with the justice system. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, ever the unconventional figure, refused to let the drama of the trial distract him. He had always been a man of action, and he was used to controversy. Yet, even Musk could not ignore the immense pressure mounting on the judge. Musk, sensing an opportunity to strike back, not just for himself, but for the integrity of the system, decided to turn the tables. Behind closed doors, Musk's legal team worked tirelessly on a new strategy. They were preparing to launch a motion that, if successful, could bring the entire trial to a screeching halt, a formal request for Judge Hale's recusal. In legal terms, this wasn't just about bias. It wasn't just about the judge's actions in the courtroom. It was about something far more insidious. The motion would argue that Hale had a conflict of interest that rendered him unfit to oversee the case, a conflict rooted in personal history, one that Musk's team had quietly uncovered. It was all thanks to Cameron West, the lead defense attorney. West had his own sources, connections that had been working overtime to dig into Hale's past. What they uncovered was explosive. Hale's involvement in a failed business venture, one that had been backed by Musk's former competitors, hadn't been publicly known. What Musk's team had uncovered was more than just financial ties, there was a personal connection, an ancient grudge that Hale had been carrying for years. It was a story that Hale had buried deep, but one that Musk's legal team had now dragged into the light. The truth was damning. Hale had invested heavily in a tech company that Musk had once briefly considered funding, only to back out at the last moment. The company had failed miserably, costing Hale a significant portion of his personal wealth. Hale had never forgiven Musk for his decision to pull out of the deal, a decision that Hale believed had directly caused his financial downfall. West's team had pieced it together. Hale's animosity toward Musk wasn't just about professional rivalry. It was personal. And with this revelation in hand, they had the perfect grounds for a recusal motion. As the motion was drafted, Emma Blake, the young law professor who had spearheaded the movement for judicial integrity, was contacted by Musk's team. Her coalition was growing stronger, and they knew that with her support, the recusal motion would gain even more traction in the public eye. Blake agreed to help, understanding that this was a turning point not just for Musk, but for the entire legal system. Her involvement would ensure that the movement wasn't just a media-driven spectacle, it would be a legitimate call for change. They would demand Hale's resignation and expose the corruption that had tainted the case from the start. In a public statement, Blake addressed the growing public unrest. The law is meant to protect us all, no matter who we are. When the very individuals charged with upholding the law let personal grudges take precedence over justice, we must stand up. This is not just about Elon Musk, this is about protecting the integrity of our legal system. We will not stand idly by while a judge abuses his power for personal gain. The statement was a rallying cry. The coalition's membership swelled overnight, with thousands of ordinary citizens, legal professionals, and activists joining the movement. They rallied outside courthouses, attended hearings, and launched a nationwide petition demanding that Judge Hale step down. But Hale wasn't done yet. He refused to back down. To him, the motion for his recusal was nothing more than an attempt to discredit him, to undermine his authority. He believed he had the right to finish what he had started, to take down Musk for the good of the people. Lydia Freeman, his loyal court officer, remained by his side through it all. As the protests and media frenzy grew louder, she watched as Hale dug in his heels. "Marcus, you're making a mistake," Lydia warned again, her voice strained. "This could ruin everything, your career, your legacy." "I'm not backing down, Lydia," Hale said with a cold finality. "I'm doing what's right. The truth will come out, and Musk will pay for his crimes. They'll see that I was right." But the more Hale pushed back, the more his enemies grew in number. And what Hale couldn't see was that his obsession with Musk was slowly consuming him. The very foundation of his power, once built on respect and authority, was now being eroded by his own vendetta. In the coming days, the motion for recusal would be heard before the court, and it would not only be a test of Hale's resolve but of the justice system itself. The day the motion for Judge Marcus R. Hale's recusal was set to be heard, the courtroom was packed. The buzz of anticipation was palpable, not just from the media but from the masses of spectators who had flooded the courthouse. People stood in line hours before the doors opened, hoping to witness a piece of legal history unfold before their eyes. This was more than just another legal battle. It had become a battle for the very soul of the judicial system, a fight for transparency, integrity, and the protection of the law from personal vendettas. The recusal motion was more than a mere procedural request. It was a declaration that the justice system, no matter how entrenched it might be, was not beyond scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, Cameron West, Elon Musk's defense attorney, stood at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The motion had been carefully prepared, but now, the real challenge was to convince the court that Marcus R. Hale's personal history with Musk created an insurmountable conflict of interest. West knew that if they could prove this point, Hale's position would become untenable. The recusal motion had the potential to change everything. West cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. His calm, composed voice cut through the tension. "Your Honor," he began, addressing the judge who had presided over the case since the very beginning, "we come before this court today not out of personal animosity, but because we believe that the foundation of justice itself is at stake. We are not here to attack the character of Judge Hale, we are here to point out that his personal biases have clouded his judgment. A judge who holds a personal vendetta against one of the parties before him cannot possibly be expected to rule impartially. This is not just about the defendant, Mr. Musk. This is about the trust that the people place in this system of justice." Hale's face was an unreadable mask, though those who knew him could see the faint tightening of his jaw. His mind was racing, but outwardly, he sat still. He had anticipated the motion. After all, he had been a judge for decades. He had seen every type of courtroom maneuver, from the strategic to the underhanded. But this was different. This wasn't just another attack on his rulings, it was a direct challenge to his authority. His loyal court officer, Lydia Freeman, sat beside him, her gaze focused ahead. She had always stood by Hale's side through the thick and thin of his career, but even she had begun to feel the weight of the case. She couldn't deny that the motion had a point. But her loyalty to Hale ran deep, and she knew that if they lost this battle, it would be more than just a loss in court, it would be a personal defeat for him. "Mr. West," Hale said, his voice a low, commanding growl. "You're accusing me of what? Bias? Personal vendetta?" He leaned forward slightly. "This is absurd. I've made my decisions based on the law, and I've followed the facts presented to me in the case. If you think I'm unable to be impartial, then you do not understand the law. I will not be bullied into stepping down from this case, especially by an attack on my integrity." West remained calm. He had expected the outburst. "Your Honor," he replied, his voice unwavering, "we have evidence that shows your financial ties to a company that once competed with Mr. Musk. Evidence that you lost money when Mr. Musk chose not to invest in that company, and evidence of your ongoing resentment toward him because of that. You may have been able to keep that hidden until now, but your bias is clear. Your actions throughout this trial have demonstrated that you are not impartial. That is why we are asking for your recusal." The courtroom was silent for a moment. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Even Hale's closest allies in the room couldn't help but glance uneasily at one another. If the evidence West had presented was strong enough, Hale might not be able to escape the consequences. But Hale, ever the fighter, was not about to let West win this round. "You think a minor financial setback is enough to disqualify me?" Hale's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm so petty that I would allow a failed business venture to color my judgment in a courtroom? I have presided over some of the most difficult cases in this country, and I have never let anything, cloud my judgment. And I'm certainly not going to start now because of some baseless allegations." West wasn't done. He motioned to a series of documents that had been submitted as evidence. These included email exchanges, financial statements, and records that tied Hale directly to the company Musk had once considered funding. In them, it was clear that Hale's financial involvement was more than just a passing interest. He had invested heavily in the business and lost a significant amount of money when Musk chose to back out. West continued, his voice growing stronger. Your Honor, we have no desire to make personal attacks, but the law requires that judges be impartial. You cannot objectively assess this case when you have a personal history with one of the parties involved. We have the facts. We have the evidence. And we have a duty to the people to ensure that justice is served. Lydia could feel the weight of every word, every sentence. The tension in the room was unbearable, and even Hale seemed to be losing his cool. His fingers tapped nervously on the edge of his bench, betraying the quiet anxiety that had begun to creep in. He was the one in control, he had always been in control, but now, that control was slipping. The judge turned his gaze to the gallery of onlookers, whose eyes were now fixed squarely on him. The media was documenting every second of the proceedings, and their cameras zoomed in on his every movement. Hale knew that this was bigger than him, bigger than the case. His reputation was on the line. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. I will review the motion and the evidence. But let it be known that this is a frivolous request, and I will not be intimidated by baseless accusations. As Hale's voice echoed in the courtroom, it became clear to everyone present that this wasn't going to be an easy decision. The recusal motion had opened a Pandora's box. The courtroom drama was no longer just about a legal dispute between Elon Musk and the state, it was about the integrity of the entire justice system, and Hale's future on the bench was now at the center of it all. The judge's ruling on the recusal motion would come within the next few days. And while Marcus Hale held on tightly to his belief in his own righteousness, a storm was brewing that would change everything. The day of the recusal ruling arrived with a sense of urgency. The tension that had been building over the past week was now thick enough to cut with a knife. The courthouse was again flooded with reporters, activists, and curious citizens eager to witness the outcome of the most controversial legal motion of the decade. Judge Marcus Hale had spent the previous night poring over the evidence presented by Elon Musk's legal team. His mind was consumed with the contents of the recusal motion. The accusations of bias, the documents linking him to Musk's failed business rival, the media frenzy, it was all becoming overwhelming. Yet, Hale's pride and conviction remained strong. He had always believed in his ability to remain impartial, and no matter how the world perceived him now, he would not let his judgment be swayed by outside pressure. But as the clock ticked down to the moment of his ruling, a quiet doubt crept into his mind. Could he truly be impartial in this case? The history with Musk was undeniable, but had it truly influenced his decisions? Hale had spent his career building a reputation as an unflinching advocate for the law, and now, for the first time, he wondered whether that reputation was slipping through his fingers. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. On one side, Cameron West, Elon Musk's defense attorney, sat with his legal team. His expression was resolute, though a hint of nervous anticipation flickered in his eyes. He had made his case, now it was up to the judge to decide. On the other side, Hale's supporters sat in silence, the weight of their loyalty to the embattled judge pressing heavily on their shoulders. Lydia Freeman, Hale's ever-loyal court officer, was seated behind him, her posture stiff with tension. She had seen Hale face many challenges over the years, but none like this. This wasn't just a legal fight, it was a battle for the very soul of his career. Lydia had long admired Hale's steadfastness, his unyielding commitment to justice. But today, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The courtroom grew still as Hale entered. He was dressed in his customary black robe, his steps measured, his expression impassive. The murmurs in the room died down as he took his seat, his gavel raised in a brief but authoritative motion. Today, we are here to address a motion filed by the defense, Hale began, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of tension. The defense has asked for my recusal from this case due to alleged conflicts of interest. I have reviewed the motion, and I have considered all the evidence presented. It is my duty to uphold the integrity of this court, and I do not take this decision lightly. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. However, Hale continued, I have come to the conclusion that the motion for recusal is without merit. There is no evidence to suggest that I have acted in a way that undermines the impartiality of this court. I will continue to preside over this case. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Elon Musk's legal team exchanged tense glances, but Cameron West remained calm, his jaw set. He had anticipated this decision, and though he had hoped for a different outcome, he was not surprised. But the fight was far from over. West had expected Hale to stand his ground, and now it was time to push back. Your Honor, West said, rising to his feet, with all due respect, we believe that your ruling is a grave error. This case is no longer about the defendant or the charges he faces. It's about the trust that the people place in this legal system. If you insist on presiding over this trial, we will have no choice but to take this matter to a higher court. Hale's face remained impassive, but a flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. He knew West was right, an appeal was inevitable. But Hale's response was calculated, deliberate. Mr. West, Hale said, his voice carrying a cool, authoritative edge, you are free to seek an appeal, but let it be known that I stand by my ruling. The law is clear. There is no legal basis for recusal. I will not be intimidated by your threats. The room fell silent as West's expression darkened. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the entire world was holding its breath. But then, something unexpected happened. The gallery of spectators, which had been quiet until now, began to murmur in disbelief. The low hum of conversation grew louder, and soon, it was clear, the people, the ones who had rallied behind Musk, the ones who had taken to the streets and social media, were not about to let Hale's ruling stand. One of the spectators, a woman in her mid-30s with bright red hair, stood up from the back row. She was holding a sign that read, Justice, not bias. Her voice rang out clear and strong. Judge Hale, you are not above the law, she shouted, her voice carrying through the courtroom. You cannot allow personal grudges to dictate justice. Other spectators followed her lead, and soon, a wave of voices erupted from the gallery. The tension that had already been palpable in the courtroom reached a boiling point. People shouted in protest, calling for Hale's resignation, demanding that the case be moved to another judge. The noise was deafening, and for a moment, it seemed as though the very walls of the courtroom would come crashing down from the weight of the public outrage. Hale's gavel struck the bench, but it was drowned out by the protests. He stood, his face flushed with anger, but the crowd's fury showed no sign of abating. Order! Order in the court! Hale shouted, his voice strained but commanding. But the protesters only grew louder, their chants ringing through the courtroom like a chorus of defiance. Lydia Freeman looked on in shock. She had never seen anything like this in all her years of working alongside Hale. The courtroom had become a battleground, not just for justice, but for control. The public was no longer passive, they were active participants in this trial, and their voices were demanding to be heard. As Hale's gavel came down once more, the room fell silent. But the damage had already been done. Hale's ruling had ignited a firestorm, one that was no longer within his control. The legal system, once an institution of calm and order, was now a battleground of emotions, biases, and allegiances. And with that, the case had entered a new phase, a phase where the law was no longer the only force at play. The courthouse was a battleground, but the war had only just begun. After Judge Hale's decision to reject the recusal motion, the tension surrounding the trial reached new heights. The protests in the courtroom and the heated public outcry had made it clear, this was no longer just a legal matter, it was a fight for justice in the eyes of the people. Hale's refusal to step down only deepened the divide between him and the public, with many now questioning his impartiality. Cameron West, Elon Musk's defense attorney, was unrelenting. The recusal motion had been a crucial first step, but now, with the judge's ruling firmly in place, it was time to take the fight to a higher court. West knew that this battle was far from over, and that the appeals court would provide an opportunity to finally dethrone Hale and find a more impartial judge. The decision to file an appeal wasn't taken lightly. West had spent hours reviewing every aspect of the case, analyzing the legal grounds for recusal and the evidence presented. The stakes were higher than ever. If the appeal was successful, Hale would be removed from the case, and Musk's legal team would have a fresh chance to fight the charges without the shadow of bias hanging over them. But the path to success would not be easy. The appeals process was slow, bureaucratic, and riddled with legal challenges. West knew that this could take weeks, or even months, to resolve. Time was not on their side, and every day the trial continued under Hale's control felt like a day closer to a disastrous verdict. At the same time, Elon Musk was feeling the weight of the situation. His empire, his reputation, and his future were all on the line. The media scrutiny was relentless, and the growing protests against the trial were creating an atmosphere of chaos. Musk had always been used to challenges, but this one was different. This time, it wasn't just about his business ventures or his innovations, it was about something much deeper, his very freedom. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Musk sat down with his legal team to discuss the next steps. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes tired, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had been through many battles in his life, but none had felt as personally invasive as this one. "I don't care what happens to me," Musk said, his voice quiet but firm. "I care about the message this sends. If we let this stand, if we let a biased judge dictate the outcome of this trial, what does that say about our justice system? What does it say about the country we're supposed to believe in?" Cameron West nodded in agreement. "This isn't just about you, Elon. It's about all of us. The system needs to be held accountable." Musk's frustration was palpable, but so was his resolve. He had always fought for the future, whether it was with Tesla, SpaceX, or his other ventures. Now, he was fighting for something even more fundamental, the integrity of the legal system. Meanwhile, in a nearby courtroom, Judge Hale sat quietly, reviewing the appeal documents that had been filed by West's team. The appeal was a direct challenge to his authority, and while he had expected it, that didn't make it any easier to digest. Hale's reputation had been tarnished by the accusations, and now the world was watching to see whether the higher courts would side with Musk's legal team or affirm Hale's ruling. Lydia Freeman, Hale's trusted court officer, sat by his side, watching him as he read through the paperwork. "Sir," she said carefully, "the appeal is moving forward. You've handled pressure before, but this is different. The public's eyes are on you." Hale didn't look up from the documents, his face hard. "The public doesn't understand the law," he said coldly. "They're reacting out of emotion, not reason. This is about upholding the law, not pandering to a crowd." Lydia didn't argue, but she knew that Hale's determination wasn't without consequences. The case had become a national spectacle, and no matter how confident Hale appeared, the pressure was mounting. Public trust in the judiciary was eroding, and Hale was now the symbol of that erosion. A few days later, the appeals court issued a brief statement. It would review the recusal motion and decide whether Judge Hale should remain on the case. The decision sent shockwaves through both the courtroom and the media. For the first time in the history of the trial, Hale's future as the presiding judge was uncertain. Elon Musk's legal team celebrated the small victory, knowing that the appeals court ruling was crucial. If they could win the appeal, they would force a new judge onto the case, one who had no history with Musk and no personal biases clouding their judgment. West believed that with a fair judge in place, Musk's chances of success would increase dramatically. But even as the appeals court prepared to review the case, Hale was not about to go down without a fight. He made it clear that he would continue to oversee the trial until a formal decision was made. The defiance in his stance only fueled the flames of the public's anger. The protests continued to escalate outside the courthouse, with more and more people joining the calls for Hale's removal. Social media campaigns were organized, and public figures rallied behind Musk, condemning Hale's conduct and calling for justice to be served. In the days that followed, both sides braced for the next phase of the legal battle. The appeals court was expected to make its decision soon, and the outcome could shape the future of the trial, and the future of Judge Marcus Hale himself. Inside the courthouse, the tension was unbearable. Everyone knew that the real battle wasn't just about the case itself, it was about the future of the legal system. And as the days passed, it became clear that no one, least of all Judge Hale, could predict how this case would end. Would the appeals court rule in favor of Musk's legal team, forcing Hale to step down? Or would Hale remain steadfast, despite the growing tide of dissent? One thing was certain, the stakes had never been higher. The tension surrounding the courtroom was now suffocating. The once quiet halls of the courthouse had become a war zone, with reporters, protesters, and curious onlookers flooding the area. It had only been a few days since the appeals court announced it would review the recusal motion, but the atmosphere felt like it had been weeks. Time seemed to drag as the nation waited for a decision that would determine the future of the trial, and of Judge Marcus Hale. Cameron West, Elon Musk's determined attorney, had been working around the clock, waiting for any sign of the appeals court's ruling. He had spent days crafting legal arguments, reviewing precedents, and hoping that the higher court would take a stand for impartiality. For West, this wasn't just about winning a case, it was about restoring faith in the justice system. In a rare moment of calm, West sat down with Elon Musk in a private meeting room just outside the courthouse. The weight of the situation hung heavily on both of them. Musk had always been confident, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than ever. "Cameron, I'm not going to lie," Musk said, his voice quiet but intense. "I've faced a lot of battles in my life, but this one is different. I feel like the entire system is turning against me. If we don't win this, everything I've worked for could go down the drain." West leaned forward, his expression determined. "Elon, we are going to fight this. This appeal is our chance. The facts are on our side. Judge Hale may have his reputation, but we have the law, and we have the truth. The higher court has to see that." Musk nodded, but his expression remained guarded. "I hope you're right. I don't just want to win for myself. I want to make sure that no one can use their power to manipulate the system like Hale did. This is bigger than just me." The conversation was a stark reminder of how much was at stake. The trial wasn't just about Musk's alleged wrongdoing, it was a fight for justice in its purest form. If Hale's bias was allowed to stand, it could set a dangerous precedent, not just for Musk, but for anyone facing the legal system. Meanwhile, in the chambers of the appeals court, the judges were deliberating. The decision they were about to make was one that would reverberate across the nation. The eyes of the world were on them. As one of the senior judges, Judith Caldwell, sat down to review the case, she felt the weight of the moment press heavily on her. Caldwell was no stranger to high-profile cases, but this was something different. This wasn't just about the law, it was about the very foundation of trust in the judiciary. Caldwell had spent years serving as a judge, and in all her time on the bench, she had never encountered a case quite like this one. Judge Hale had a reputation for being fair and unbiased, at least, that was the public perception. But the evidence presented by Musk's legal team was hard to ignore. Could Hale's personal history with Musk's business rival truly be dismissed as irrelevant? Or was it something that should have disqualified him from the case? As Caldwell read over the appeal documents, she couldn't help but think of the broader implications. If the court ruled in favor of the recusal motion, it would send a powerful message about accountability in the judiciary. But at the same time, the decision could spark a political firestorm. The public was already divided, with some calling for Hale's immediate removal, while others defended him as a pillar of legal integrity. In the end, it wasn't just about whether or not Hale had made a mistake, it was about whether the public could trust the legal system to function impartially. If the system could be swayed by public opinion or personal bias, then it was fundamentally broken. The clock ticked on as the judges continued their deliberations. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the decision was made. The appeals court would issue a ruling within the next 48 hours. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Protesters had gathered once again, chanting slogans, waving signs demanding justice. For them, this case wasn't just about Elon Musk. It was about the future of fairness in the legal system. The media buzzed with speculation, each outlet vying for the latest scoop on the ruling. Would the appeals court uphold Hale's decision? Or would they force him to step down and allow for a new judge to take over the case? Inside the courthouse, the news was coming in. A hush fell over the building as an announcement was made. The appeals court had issued its ruling. The courtroom was packed once again as the decision was read aloud. Judge Marcus Hale, still sitting in his chair behind the bench, listened intently, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. He knew that this moment would change everything. The head of the appeals court panel, Judge Judith Caldwell, rose to address the room. The murmurs in the courtroom faded as all eyes turned to her. After careful review of the recusal motion and the arguments presented, Caldwell began, her voice carrying a sense of gravitas. The appeals court has decided to uphold the motion for recusal. Judge Marcus Hale will no longer preside over this case. The room erupted in a mix of cheers and boos. For Musk's supporters, it was a moment of triumph. The tide had turned in their favor. For those who had supported Judge Hale, it was a crushing blow. The credibility of the judiciary had been questioned, and now it was clear that even Hale's authority could be overruled. Hale, for a moment, remained stoic. His expression didn't change, but the weight of the ruling hit him like a freight train. His career, once untouchable, was now in jeopardy. The public outcry, the protests, the constant scrutiny, it had all led to this moment. The legal system, it seemed, had spoken. Hale was no longer the man in charge of this case. Cameron West stood and turned to Elon Musk, a sense of victory in his eyes. This is what we needed, Elon. It's a huge step forward. Musk's face softened slightly, but there was no real celebration. It's not over yet, Cameron, he replied quietly. We still have to win the case. But this was important. Judge Hale slowly stood from the bench, his movements deliberate. His career, his legacy, and his reputation were now on the line. As he exited the courtroom, the whispers grew louder, and the protests outside grew more intense. The battle for justice was far from over, but for now, one side had won a significant victory. The case was far from over, but a new chapter had begun. The courtroom had changed overnight. The intense atmosphere that had dominated the proceedings for weeks began to shift. With the appeals court's ruling, the stage was set for a fresh start, one that Musk and his legal team had been desperately hoping for. The ousting of Judge Marcus Hale had sent shockwaves throughout the legal world, but for now, it was Musk's moment to breathe. He had been granted something more valuable than a simple legal victory, he had been granted a fair chance. It was early morning when the news broke that a new judge had been appointed to preside over the case. Judge Lorraine Harper, an experienced jurist with a reputation for impartiality, had been assigned to replace Hale. Harper was well known for her measured, level-headed approach to the law, and her track record of making decisions based purely on evidence and facts, rather than emotions or external pressures. For Musk's legal team, this was a moment of triumph. Cameron West, who had been through a whirlwind of emotions since the start of the trial, felt a deep sense of relief. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but with Harper now in charge, they had hope. We have a fresh start, Elon, West said as they sat together in a private room in the courthouse. Judge Harper is known for fairness, and she doesn't tolerate any nonsense. This is our chance to prove the case on its merits. Musk, who had been unusually quiet throughout the last few days, finally let out a breath. I don't want to get my hopes up, he replied. But I'm glad Hale's out. This trial should have never been about bias. The relief was palpable, but both men knew that the hardest part of the fight was still ahead. Despite the change in leadership, the case against Musk still had to be fought. The charges were serious, and the pressure was mounting. The public's eyes were still on them, and the media would never let up, but now, they were going into the next phase of the trial with a fighting chance. But even as hope began to swell in the hearts of Musk supporters, the other side wasn't giving up. The prosecution, led by the relentless Catherine Dunn, wasted no time in adjusting their strategy. Dunn had been one of the most vocal critics of the recusal motion and had openly expressed her belief that Musk was guilty of the charges. She had been eager to see the case continue under Hale's guidance, but now, with Harper in charge, she knew the pressure was on her to prove the allegations in a much more challenging environment. As the trial progressed under Judge Harper, Dunn kept up her aggressive stance. She filed multiple motions, tried to introduce new evidence, and did everything in her power to push the case forward. But Harper's steady hand kept the proceedings grounded, ensuring that every piece of evidence was carefully scrutinized. The stakes were high, but Musk's legal team was prepared. West was confident that the new judge would give them the fair hearing they had been denied under Hale's reign. If they could navigate the next few weeks without any more distractions, they stood a good chance of turning the tide in their favor. Musk sat silently in the back of the courtroom, watching every development closely. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. Despite the progress, he knew that the road ahead was filled with obstacles. This battle wasn't over yet. But with Judge Harper now in control, Musk had something he hadn't had before: hope. The scales of justice were finally being balanced in his favor, and that gave him the strength to fight on. As the trial continued under Judge Lorraine Harper's steady hand, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. The drama of Judge Hale's sudden removal and the overwhelming public scrutiny were slowly becoming a thing of the past. But, for Elon Musk and his legal team, the war was far from over. The prosecution, led by Catherine Dunn, had no intention of letting the case slip away without a fight. Dunn's strategy had always been to outlast, to wear Musk and his team down. Her every move was calculated, and she knew that her only chance for victory lay in making this trial as prolonged and complicated as possible. Musk had expected this. He knew that Dunn would do whatever it took to cast doubt on his innocence, and he wasn't about to let up. The day began with a quiet hum of anticipation as Musk's team settled into the courtroom. There were no wild protests or media frenzy like there had been in the days following Hale's recusal, but the tension still crackled in the air. Elon sat at the table, his mind focused. He had prepared himself for every possible angle, but there was always that lingering doubt: could they truly win? Judge Harper entered the courtroom, her presence commanding immediate attention. The room went silent as she took her seat at the bench, her demeanor calm but firm. "Good morning, everyone," Harper said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "Let's proceed." The legal team stood and exchanged brief pleasantries. Then, Catherine Dunn rose to make her opening remarks for the day, her eyes focused intently on Musk. She didn't speak loudly, but her words were sharp, calculated. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mr. Musk's actions have brought us to this moment. We are not talking about minor infractions. What we're talking about is a deliberate attempt to deceive, to manipulate, and to mislead the public," Dunn said, her voice steady as she directed her attention to Musk. "We will prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Elon Musk, despite his public persona as a visionary entrepreneur, used his position and influence to break the law for personal gain." The words hit like a punch. Musk's jaw tightened, but he refused to let the pressure show. He had heard this rhetoric before, but with the calm presence of Judge Harper now in charge, the game had changed. Dunn's words were just that, words. Now, they would have to prove them. Judge Harper's gaze was steady as she addressed Dunn. "You are aware, Ms. Dunn, that this trial will be based on facts. If you are going to make accusations, you must back them with hard evidence. Do you have the evidence?" Dunn smiled, confident in her preparations. "Of course, Your Honor," she replied. "We have gathered testimonies, documents, and financial records that we believe will prove Mr. Musk's guilt." The trial continued, with both sides presenting their arguments. Musk's legal team, under Cameron West's leadership, made their case with precision and poise. They outlined the lack of concrete evidence against Musk and the speculative nature of the prosecution's claims. They also reminded the court of the significant legal and financial scrutiny Musk's companies already faced, scrutiny that made any deliberate deception all the more difficult to prove. But the real battle wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the court of public opinion. Even though Judge Harper had taken control and was determined to ensure fairness, the media machine surrounding the case was relentless. Every twist, every motion, every legal maneuver was scrutinized, amplified, and often distorted by the news outlets desperate for a scandal. The tabloids were filled with sensational headlines, painting Musk as everything from a fraudster to a misunderstood genius. Some outlets called the case a witch hunt, while others relentlessly repeated the prosecution's narrative. The public discourse surrounding Musk's image was growing increasingly polarized. West knew that the media, while not directly influencing the courtroom, could certainly affect the jury pool and the public's perception. He had to move fast. One of his key strategies was a bold move. West had requested a private meeting with Judge Harper, asking for an immediate ruling on the motion to dismiss the case. He believed that the prosecution's evidence was weak and that the case should be thrown out on procedural grounds. He had the feeling that Judge Harper would listen, but even more importantly, he trusted that she would make a decision based on fairness, not public outcry. When the day for that motion finally arrived, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. It was a pivotal moment in the trial. West stood before Judge Harper and laid out his case. "Your Honor, we respectfully request that the charges against Mr. Musk be dismissed," West said. "The prosecution has failed to provide tangible, irrefutable evidence linking Mr. Musk to any criminal activity. What they have presented is based on speculation, assumptions, and a misguided attempt to vilify a public figure." Dunn was quick to object, her voice cutting through the air. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. We have witnesses, documents, and testimony that point directly to Mr. Musk's involvement. To dismiss the case now would be to undermine the gravity of the charges." Judge Harper looked at both sides carefully, her expression unreadable. The room was completely silent, waiting for her decision. After what seemed like an eternity, Judge Harper spoke. "While I appreciate the arguments from both sides, I find that there is enough evidence presented for this case to proceed," she said. "However, I will remind both the prosecution and the defense that I expect this trial to proceed without unnecessary delays. I will not tolerate motions designed to drag this out." The ruling was a blow to Musk's legal team, but it wasn't unexpected. West had anticipated that the judge might want the case to run its course, rather than dismiss it outright. But there was something deeper at play here. As West returned to his seat, he exchanged a quick look with Musk. Despite the setback, they both knew something important: Judge Harper was no pushover. She wasn't swayed by the media, and she wasn't going to let the case turn into a circus. If anything, her ruling reinforced the idea that this trial would be about facts and evidence, nothing more, nothing less. As the trial resumed, the prosecution's case continued to unfold, but West and Musk remained focused. The road ahead was still long, but with a fair judge and a team that was more determined than ever, the fight was far from over. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following Judge Harper's ruling were a whirlwind for both sides of the case. The courtroom, once filled with tension and whispers about the recusal of Judge Hale, had now become a place of serious legal battles. Elon Musk's legal team had lost a battle with the motion to dismiss, but the real test lay ahead. There was still a trial to win, and no matter the setbacks, Musk wasn't going down without a fight. Judge Lorraine Harper's steady hand had given both sides a fresh start, and in the wake of her rulings, the tension in the courtroom had shifted. There were no more distractions, no more theatrics. This was a fight for the facts, and Musk and his team knew that they had to present their best case to win. For Musk, it was a personal trial as much as a legal one. The weight of the public's opinion, skewed as it might be, still hung heavily on his shoulders. He was used to the spotlight, but this trial was different. The charges, the accusations, and the relentless media scrutiny made it feel like a battle for his very identity. Was he the visionary entrepreneur that the world celebrated, or was he the villain that the prosecution was trying to paint him as? Musk knew that his character would be tested in ways he had never experienced before. He was no stranger to challenges, but this was more than just about innovation or technology. It was about integrity, and it was about proving that a man could be more than the sum of the rumors surrounding him. The prosecution, under the watchful eyes of Catherine Dunn, had spent the last few days amping up the pressure. They were now focusing on Musk's personal life and his business dealings. Their goal was clear: to paint Musk as someone who had used his power and influence for personal gain, without regard for the consequences of his actions. Dunn called her first key witness to the stand, Stephanie Lewis, a former employee at one of Musk's companies who had worked directly under him for several years. Lewis's testimony was highly anticipated by both sides. As she took the stand, the courtroom grew quiet. Lewis, a well-spoken woman in her mid-30s, appeared calm and composed, but it was clear that her testimony could make or break the case. Dunn wasted no time. She went straight for the jugular. "Ms. Lewis, you've worked closely with Mr. Musk for several years, correct?" Dunn asked. "That's correct," Lewis replied. "And in your time working with him, did you ever witness any actions that would suggest that Mr. Musk acted inappropriately or illegally?" Lewis hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "There were times when Mr. Musk would make decisions that seemed to prioritize his own interests over the interests of the company," she began. "For example, there were several instances where resources were allocated in a way that seemed to benefit his personal projects, rather than the business as a whole." The words hung in the air like a cloud, casting doubt on Musk's character. It wasn't the smoking gun the prosecution had hoped for, but it was enough to raise questions. Dunn pounced on the opportunity. "So, you're suggesting that Mr. Musk used his position to advance his personal interests at the expense of the company?" Dunn asked, her voice rising with conviction. "I wouldn't say he intentionally harmed the company, but it often seemed like his personal ventures took precedence," Lewis responded. Musk's legal team braced themselves for the fallout. They had anticipated this kind of testimony. West was already on his feet, ready to cross-examine. "Ms. Lewis," West began, his voice calm but firm. "You claim that Mr. Musk prioritized his personal interests over the company's, but can you point to any specific actions that were illegal or unethical?" Lewis faltered for a moment. I don't know if I can say that any of his actions were illegal," she admitted. "But I'm just saying that sometimes the priorities seemed misplaced." West raised an eyebrow. "So, you can't actually point to any evidence of illegal activity, only your personal perception of priorities?" Lewis remained silent, her earlier confidence waning. West pressed on. "Thank you, Ms. Lewis. No further questions." It was a moment of relief for Musk's team. The prosecution had tried to discredit him by presenting his business decisions as evidence of wrongdoing, but they hadn't been able to make their case. West had expertly shown that perception wasn't the same as proof. As the trial wore on, Musk knew that the moment would come when he would have to take the stand. It was inevitable. His legal team had strategized that it would be the right time, when the case against him was at its weakest and when they could turn the narrative around. Musk wasn't unfamiliar with the pressure of being in the spotlight. He had given interviews, faced intense media scrutiny, and been on the receiving end of personal attacks before. But sitting in the witness chair, under the harsh gaze of both the prosecution and the defense, was different. It was a personal test of his character. He took a deep breath as he stood and walked to the stand, his heart pounding. West gave him a reassuring nod before turning to Judge Harper. "Your Honor, we call Mr. Elon Musk to the stand." Musk sat down, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. Dunn wasted no time. She began her questioning with a sharp tone. "Mr. Musk," Dunn began, "you've built your empire on the backs of millions of people who have invested in your companies. And yet, here we are today, because of the actions you've taken, actions that have harmed those very people. How do you explain your behavior?" Musk's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't about to let her define him. "Ms. Dunn, I've spent my life working to create things that change the world," Musk replied, his voice calm but firm. Tesla, SpaceX, SolarCity, these companies were built with the intention of making a positive impact, not just for my benefit, but for the benefit of humanity. I've always believed that the future can be better if we push hard enough to make it so. Dunn leaned forward, a glimmer of skepticism in her eyes. "But you've made millions, even billions, from those ventures. How do you justify your personal wealth while the rest of the world struggles?" Musk took a moment before answering. "I don't apologize for being successful. But my success has never been about money. It's about solving problems that matter. Whether it's creating electric cars to combat climate change or developing technologies to send humanity to Mars, I've made decisions based on what I believe is right, not on personal gain." The courtroom fell silent. Musk's words were direct, unflinching. This wasn't just a defense of his businesses, it was a defense of his very character. It was a stand for the man he knew himself to be, despite the media's portrayal of him. Judge Harper watched intently, her gaze unreadable, but she said nothing. It was clear that she was allowing Musk the space to speak, to tell his story. Dunn, sensing that her attempt to tear down Musk's character had failed, shifted tactics. "Mr. Musk, you've made some questionable decisions in the past. Are you really telling this court that you've never used your position for personal gain?" Musk took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I've made mistakes, like anyone else. But I've never broken the law. And I've always tried to do the right thing for the companies I've built and for the people who believe in them." Dunn's questioning continued, but the damage had already been done. Musk's answer had been clear, and it had resonated in the courtroom. For the first time since the trial had begun, Musk felt like he was on solid ground. The pressure was immense, but he had stood up for his integrity. He had spoken truthfully, not just to defend himself, but to reaffirm his belief in the work he did and the values he held. Judge Harper seemed to sense the shift in the room as well. She didn't interrupt, but her steady presence conveyed that she was listening, not just to the accusations, but to the man himself. The trial was far from over, but in that moment, it felt like a turning point. Musk's character had been put to the test, and he had passed. The courtroom had shifted its focus. For days, the prosecution had hammered away at Elon Musk's character, trying to break him down with accusations and personal attacks. But Musk had stood firm. His testimony, despite the sharpness of Catherine Dunn's questioning, had given his defense a much-needed boost. The courtroom was abuzz with whispers. Could this case really end in Musk's favor? But the game was far from over. As the trial continued, the next phase was crucial, the presentation of the evidence. Elon's legal team, led by Cameron West, had always known that this was where they could make their move. They had been preparing for this moment since the trial began, and it was time to unleash their own arsenal of evidence. It was a calculated risk. They would present everything they had, hoping to expose the flaws in the prosecution's case and turn the tide of the trial in Musk's favor. It was a tense morning as West stood to speak. The courtroom fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. "Your Honor, we are prepared to present evidence that will refute the prosecution's claims and provide a clear picture of Mr. Musk's innocence," West said, his voice steady and authoritative. Judge Harper nodded, signaling for the presentation to begin. West's legal team pulled up a series of documents and digital files, preparing to lay out their case. Musk sat back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the proceedings. He knew that the next few hours could determine the outcome of this trial. West's team began with what seemed like a small but significant piece of evidence, a set of emails. The emails, dated back to the time period when the alleged fraudulent activity took place, were correspondence between Musk and several senior executives at Tesla and SpaceX. The emails, however, didn't show what the prosecution had hoped. Instead of evidence of illegal activities or manipulation, the emails painted a picture of Musk's obsessive drive to push the boundaries of innovation. They revealed candid discussions about the challenges his companies faced, financial troubles, supply chain disruptions, and the mounting pressure to deliver on promises to investors. West pointed to one email, where Musk expressed his frustration with the media's portrayal of his companies and his willingness to push forward despite public scrutiny. This email chain shows that Mr. Musk was not focused on personal gain or deception, West explained. It shows a man under extreme pressure, working tirelessly to ensure the future success of his companies. He wasn't looking to mislead anyone, he was doing what was necessary to keep his companies afloat. Dunn shot back quickly. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a series of emails between executives. It proves nothing. West held up his hand. Ms. Dunn, these emails show the reality of Mr. Musk's actions. They are not some nefarious plot to mislead investors. They are the communications of a man who is trying to lead groundbreaking companies, even when faced with extreme challenges. Judge Harper nodded thoughtfully. The emails were far from a smoking gun, but they painted Musk in a more sympathetic light. Next, West's team introduced a series of financial documents, including Tesla's balance sheets, SpaceX's growth projections, and investor communications. These documents detailed the company's struggles, but they also showed their rapid growth, their increasing revenue streams, and their successful ventures. One set of documents stood out in particular, a detailed breakdown of Tesla's investments and growth over a 5-year period. The projections showed that Tesla, despite the intense challenges it faced, had always remained on a path to profitability, with or without Musk's personal influence. These financial records show that Tesla was a company with enormous potential, West said, presenting the documents to the court. And while Mr. Musk's leadership played a key role in that, the idea that he engaged in any form of fraud or deceptive practices is simply not supported by the evidence. Dunn didn't waste any time trying to challenge the financials. These projections don't tell the full story, Mr. West, she argued. What's missing here is the context, the manipulation of stock prices, the inflated valuation of Tesla, and the misleading statements made to investors. But West was ready. The growth of Tesla and SpaceX wasn't a result of stock manipulation, it was a result of hard work, long hours, and the vision of a man who believed in the future of electric vehicles and space travel. Just as it seemed that Musk's legal team was gaining ground, West introduced a third piece of evidence, an unexpected witness. This individual was not someone Musk's team had previously mentioned in their strategy, and their arrival took the room by surprise. Your Honor, we would now like to call Henry Adler, a former senior executive at one of Mr. Musk's companies, to the stand, West announced. The room went silent as Henry Adler made his way to the witness stand. He was a man in his late 40s, his demeanor serious, but there was a noticeable nervousness in his eyes. As he sat down, he cleared his throat before speaking. Mr. Adler, can you explain to the court what your role was at Tesla and why you are here today? West asked. Adler's voice was shaky at first, but he gathered himself. I was responsible for overseeing a number of key operations at Tesla. I worked directly under Mr. Musk for several years. My job was to help the company grow and navigate some of its most challenging periods. West nodded. And during your time at Tesla, did you ever witness any actions that would suggest Mr. Musk was involved in any illegal or deceptive activities? Adler hesitated for a moment before responding. No, I did not. There was a pause. The room was still, waiting for the next question. West didn't miss a beat. Are you sure, Mr. Adler? Because, as you know, your testimony is crucial to this case. Did you ever witness anything that suggested that Mr. Musk misled investors or engaged in fraudulent activity? Adler's voice faltered. No. I never saw anything like that. Mr. Musk was always focused on the long-term goals of the company. It was always about innovation, about taking risks that others wouldn't take. West smiled slightly. Thank you, Mr. Adler. No further questions. Dunn jumped up immediately, eager to cross-examine. Mr. Adler, Dunn began, her voice sharp, you were fired by Mr. Musk. Do you think your testimony today is influenced by personal bitterness? Adler looked uncomfortable, but his response was firm. No. I left Tesla because I disagreed with some of the company's decisions, but I never saw any illegal activity. Mr. Musk was always transparent about his intentions. Dunn's attempt to undermine Adler's credibility had failed. The evidence presented by West's team was a turning point in the trial. It wasn't just about the documents or emails, it was about the story they told. Musk wasn't some greedy entrepreneur who had exploited his companies for personal gain. He was a man who had taken risks, faced immense pressure, and made tough decisions to ensure the future of his ventures. The prosecution's case was beginning to unravel. Musk's legal team had turned the tide, and it seemed as though the public and the jury were starting to see him in a different light. But even as the evidence piled up, the question still lingered: would it be enough? Musk had faced so much adversity already, and his future hung in the balance. As the courtroom emptied for the day, Musk couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. He had fought hard, but there was still a long road ahead. The courtroom was electric. The days following the presentation of evidence had been a roller coaster for both sides. Musk's legal team had managed to put together a powerful defense, one that had taken the prosecution by surprise. But there was still one more hurdle to overcome. With the tide shifting in Musk's favor, the pressure was mounting for both his legal team and the prosecution. Catherine Dunn, the seasoned prosecutor, was not a woman to back down. If anything, the recent setback only fueled her determination. She had been caught off guard by the strength of Musk's defense, but she wasn't going to let that be the end of the story. The prosecution had more tricks up its sleeve, and they were ready to go on the offensive. Judge Lorraine Harper, who had kept a level head throughout the trial, was also feeling the weight of the moment. She had witnessed the dramatic shifts in the courtroom and knew that the final outcome was inching closer. But in the back of her mind, something didn't sit right with her. She had always believed in the integrity of the legal process, and yet, something about this case seemed off. There was more beneath the surface, and she wasn't sure what to make of it. The next day of the trial began with an unexpected turn of events. Musk sat nervously in the defendant's chair, his eyes scanning the room. The courtroom was packed, and the air was thick with anticipation. West had just finished a brief update to Judge Harper, and the jury appeared to be more engaged than ever. But just as the morning session was about to begin, Dunn made a surprising announcement. "Your Honor, we have new evidence to present," Dunn said, her voice calm but with a hint of something unsettling beneath the surface. The words echoed in the courtroom, and a murmur spread through the audience. New evidence? Was this some kind of last-ditch effort to regain control of the case? West's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. He had expected nothing more than cross-examinations and closing arguments from the prosecution. But new evidence? This was unexpected. Judge Harper's expression was unreadable as she addressed Dunn. "What kind of evidence are you referring to, Ms. Dunn?" Dunn, standing tall with a confident air, nodded toward the court clerk. "It's in the form of a witness, one who has direct knowledge of Mr. Musk's actions and his business dealings. We were not able to present this individual earlier, but we believe their testimony is crucial to the case." The courtroom gasped. A new witness? This was a game changer. Musk's heart sank. He had prepared for everything, but a surprise witness? That could throw everything off course. West stood up immediately, his voice steady. "Your Honor, I object. If this witness was available, why wasn't this information presented earlier? This is clearly an attempt to introduce last-minute evidence to damage our case." Judge Harper glanced at both attorneys before making a decision. "I will allow the witness to testify, but we must proceed cautiously. If this is an attempt to introduce evidence that should have been disclosed earlier, there will be consequences." The tension in the room was palpable as Dunn called the witness forward. The door to the courtroom opened, and a figure emerged from the back, stepping into the spotlight. The woman who walked into the courtroom was not someone anyone had seen before. Jennifer Carson, a tall, poised woman in her mid-40s, stepped forward confidently, her face a mask of determination. She had long, dark hair and a composed demeanor, but there was an air of mystery about her. She wasn't an obvious part of Musk's inner circle, nor had she been mentioned by the prosecution before. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Harper instructed. "Jennifer Carson," the woman replied, her voice steady but cool. "I was a senior executive at Tesla, working directly under Elon Musk for several years." The word struck like a bolt of lightning. Musk's legal team exchanged looks of disbelief. Another former Tesla executive? This was something they hadn't expected. West, as calm as ever, stood up to cross-examine her, trying to gather any information that could weaken her testimony. "Ms. Carson," West began, "you claim to have worked directly under Mr. Musk for years. Can you explain your position at Tesla?" "I was in charge of operations and product development," Carson answered, her voice unwavering. "I worked closely with Mr. Musk on several key initiatives. And I saw things firsthand, things that I can no longer stay silent about." West's mind raced. "What exactly do you mean by, things you saw firsthand?" Carson's gaze locked with Musk's for the first time. Mr. Musk was not the visionary leader everyone believes him to be. Over the years, I witnessed countless instances where Tesla's resources were misused. There was intentional inflation of sales numbers, misleading investors, and deliberate disregard for safety protocols. This was not just business, it was manipulation. A hush fell over the room. Musk's chest tightened. These were heavy accusations, ones that had the potential to destroy everything he had worked for. His mind was spinning. Carson's testimony was the kind of bombshell that could shift the entire course of the trial. West didn't flinch. "Ms. Carson, you're alleging that Mr. Musk misused resources and misled investors. Can you provide any concrete evidence to support these claims?" Carson's eyes didn't waver. "I have documents. Emails. Financial statements. All of it." The shock of her words reverberated through the courtroom. West was stunned. How could this happen? Why hadn't they seen this coming? Carson proceeded to present a series of documents that she claimed were proof of Tesla's inflated numbers and misleading tactics. Emails between her and other Tesla executives detailed strategies for manipulating the company's image and stock price. Financial documents showed discrepancies in the reported sales figures. Musk's legal team was on the defensive now. West immediately objected to the documents, arguing that they had never seen them before and that their authenticity was in question. But Judge Harper overruled the objection, allowing Carson to continue her testimony. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The prosecution had just introduced a game-changing witness, someone who claimed to have been inside Musk's operations, someone who had the potential to bring down his empire. As Carson continued her testimony, Musk's thoughts drifted. Was any of this true? Had he unknowingly allowed the people around him to manipulate his companies? It was hard to accept, but the documents seemed legitimate. The emails, the financial records, they all pointed to something dark hidden beneath the surface. Was Carson a whistleblower who had truly witnessed fraud, or was she a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge? Musk didn't know. But one thing was clear, the courtroom had just been handed the most dangerous weapon yet in this fight. He glanced over at his legal team, who were frantically reviewing the documents. West's face was hard to read, but there was no denying the gravity of the situation. Judge Harper looked over at Musk, her expression unreadable. Was she starting to question his character as well? The courtroom was in an uproar. Jennifer Carson's testimony had shaken the very foundation of Elon Musk's defense. The weight of her allegations was undeniable: fraud, deception, manipulation of stock prices, and an orchestrated effort to mislead investors. Musk's empire, built on the belief that he was a visionary, now seemed to be crumbling before his eyes. The future of Tesla, SpaceX, and Musk himself hung in the balance. But something didn't sit right with Cameron West, Musk's lead attorney. He was no rookie, he had seen his share of courtroom battles, and he could sense when something wasn't adding up. Carson's testimony felt too rehearsed, too convenient. It was almost as though she had been waiting for this moment, for the opportunity to drop a bombshell. Was it revenge, or was there something more sinister at play? West's mind was racing. He had to find a way to expose Carson's credibility, or lack thereof. If her testimony was as fabricated as he suspected, it could turn the trial in Musk's favor once again. But how could he prove it? The documents she presented seemed legitimate, but West knew that with the right line of questioning, he could peel back the layers and expose the truth. As the morning session ended, West motioned for Musk to join him in a quiet corner of the courtroom. The tension between them was palpable. "Cameron," Musk said, his voice low but anxious. "What now? How do we fight this?" West took a deep breath, scanning the courtroom. "We fight fire with fire. We need to know everything about Jennifer Carson, every document, every email, every connection she has to the prosecution. We can't let her control the narrative." Musk nodded, feeling a wave of frustration wash over him. It seemed like no matter how many obstacles he overcame, another one always appeared, bigger and more dangerous than the last. That evening, West's team worked tirelessly, going through every file and email they could find about Jennifer Carson. They were looking for something, anything, that could discredit her testimony or suggest an ulterior motive. Hours passed, and just as West was beginning to lose hope, a breakthrough came. One of the junior associates on West's team, Lily Harris, discovered something suspicious buried in the pile of evidence. Carson had been involved in a business venture after her time at Tesla, an ambitious tech startup focused on autonomous vehicles. The venture had failed, and there were records of bitter disputes with Musk and his companies over intellectual property and financial disagreements. Lily immediately brought the information to West. "I think I've found something," Lily said, her voice urgent. Carson's startup collapsed, and there are emails showing that she tried to take legal action against Musk's companies for allegedly stealing her ideas. West's mind raced. This could be the key. If Carson had a personal vendetta against Musk, it could explain her testimony, and the timing of her appearance in the trial. But how to use this information? He looked at the clock. It was late, but the stakes were too high to wait until the morning. West knew what he had to do. The next morning, the courtroom was on edge. The jury was seated, the spectators eager to see how the trial would unfold. Musk's legal team was ready. West had a plan to dismantle Carson's credibility, and he wasn't going to waste any time. As Carson took the stand again, West stood, his posture confident and deliberate. The moment had arrived. "Ms. Carson," West began, his voice calm and measured, "you testified yesterday that you witnessed first-hand fraudulent activity at Tesla under Mr. Musk's leadership. But there's something I need to ask you about. Before you worked at Tesla, you had a career in technology, didn't you?" Carson's lips tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, I had a background in tech and product development." West smiled faintly. "And after your time at Tesla, you decided to launch your own company, a tech startup focused on autonomous vehicles?" Carson's gaze shifted slightly. "Yes, I did. But it was an independent venture, not related to Tesla." West's voice lowered, almost as if he were telling a secret. "But it's true, isn't it, that your company faced significant challenges, and you were unable to achieve the success you'd hoped for? In fact, your venture ultimately failed." The courtroom was silent. Carson's face flushed. "That's not relevant to this trial." West pressed on. "It is relevant. Because after your company failed, you sought legal action against Mr. Musk and his companies, accusing them of stealing your ideas and using their resources to sabotage your business." Carson's expression faltered. "That was a misunderstanding. Was it?" West countered, his voice now filled with conviction. "In the emails I'm about to present to this court, you claim that Mr. Musk personally interfered with your company's success. You accused him of intellectual property theft, and when your lawsuit didn't succeed, you turned your focus to Tesla and SpaceX. It's almost as if you were waiting for an opportunity to discredit him." The documents were projected on the screen behind West, and the courtroom could see the emails that Carson had sent, filled with bitter accusations and demands for compensation. The words were stark, direct, and undeniably hostile. There was no mistaking the animosity in Carson's language. Carson's face had turned pale. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Those emails were private discussions between me and my legal team. They were part of a failed business endeavor. West didn't let up. Ms. Carson, you had a personal motive, didn't you? You had a vendetta against Mr. Musk and his companies, and now you're using this trial as a means of revenge. You're not here as a whistleblower, you're here because you failed in your own business venture and are trying to ruin Mr. Musk in the process. The courtroom was silent, the tension hanging thick in the air. Carson's lips trembled, but she didn't respond. West turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a story about fraud. This is a story about personal grievances and a failed business venture. The allegations against Mr. Musk are nothing more than a smokescreen. Don't be misled by a disgruntled former employee seeking retribution. Judge Harper watched the exchange closely, her sharp eyes taking in every word and gesture. Musk's legal team had clearly made their move. The question now was whether the jury would buy it. Carson's testimony had been powerful, but it was beginning to crumble under scrutiny. Musk sat in his seat, his hands clenched. The emotional roller coaster of the past weeks had drained him, but he could feel a renewed sense of hope now. West had turned the tide, at least for the moment. But there were still plenty of obstacles ahead. Carson's credibility had taken a severe blow, but her story was still out there. The prosecution had an opportunity to counter West's claims, and the battle was far from over. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Catherine Dunn, the prosecutor, had been silent during West's devastating cross-examination of Jennifer Carson. But she wasn't done yet. The sudden cracks in Carson's testimony were a setback, but the prosecution was far from finished. In fact, this might be the perfect moment for a counterstrike. Dunn had a plan, and she knew exactly how to turn the tide back in her favor. As the morning session began, the room was heavy with anticipation. The jury was still processing the bombshell documents and emails that had been presented by West. Carson's credibility had been deeply shaken, and it seemed like Musk's legal team had gained some ground. But Dunn had one more ace up her sleeve, an ace that would challenge everything Musk and his team thought they knew. Dunn stood up, her posture confident, and addressed Judge Harper. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call a new witness to the stand. The room fell silent as the door to the courtroom opened. A man in a sharp suit entered, his face calm but unreadable. This was not someone anyone had seen before. His name was Daniel Wright, and he was about to change everything. Mr. Wright, Dunn began as he took the witness stand, can you please state your relationship to Mr. Elon Musk? Wright, who appeared to be in his early 40s, turned to the jury. His eyes scanned the room briefly before answering, I was Mr. Musk's personal assistant for over 5 years. I worked closely with him on various projects, including Tesla, SpaceX, and several other business ventures. Gasps filled the room. Another person from Musk's inner circle? This was a bombshell. If anyone could expose Musk's behavior behind closed doors, it would be someone who had been by his side for years. Dunn wasted no time. Mr. Wright, during your time working with Mr. Musk, did you ever witness any activity that could be described as fraudulent or misleading? Wright took a deep breath before responding, his voice steady. Yes, I did. On several occasions, I saw Mr. Musk engage in practices that, in my opinion, were unethical and possibly illegal. There were times when company financials were manipulated to make Tesla appear more successful than it was. The words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke. The room was in a state of shock. The man who had been at Musk's side for years was now accusing him of serious misconduct. It was one thing to have former employees like Carson testify, but someone like Wright, who had been an integral part of Musk's operations, was an entirely different matter. West stood up immediately, objecting. Your Honor, this is a complete surprise. We had no prior knowledge of this witness or these claims. We request that you exclude his testimony, as it violates the rules of disclosure. Judge Harper considered the objection for a moment before responding. Mr. West, the prosecution has the right to present new evidence. I'll allow Mr. Wright to testify, but I will review the situation after this session if necessary. West shot a glance at Musk, whose face had drained of color. This was not how he had imagined the trial going. He needed to find a way to counter this. Fast. Dunn pressed on, her voice cutting through the tension. Mr. Wright, can you provide specific examples of the fraudulent practices you witnessed during your time with Mr. Musk? Wright nodded. There were several instances where Tesla's quarterly earnings were inflated to boost stock prices. I saw documents showing that the company exaggerated production numbers to make it seem like Tesla was outperforming its competitors. Mr. Musk personally approved these numbers, knowing full well that they were not accurate. Musk's heart raced. This was worse than he had feared. It was one thing for someone like Jennifer Carson to accuse him of misconduct, but now someone who had been right there in the thick of things was backing up those claims with direct knowledge. The courtroom was holding its breath as Wright continued. There were also meetings where Mr. Musk insisted on launching products ahead of schedule, knowing that the production was not ready. It was all about maintaining the illusion of success. He had a vision for Tesla, and he was willing to manipulate anything to make that vision a reality. West could barely contain his frustration. Objection, Your Honor. This is pure speculation. Mr. Wright doesn't have concrete evidence to back up these claims. Dunn smiled slightly. Your Honor, I believe the witness is simply providing his account of events, which he witnessed firsthand. These are his observations. Judge Harper paused before ruling. I'll allow the testimony, but we will revisit the matter if necessary. Continue, Mr. Wright. Musk's hands tightened into fists. His entire empire was now being scrutinized. The accusations were building, and he couldn't ignore the feeling that something far more sinister was unfolding. As Wright's testimony continued, Musk began to feel the weight of the situation. The prosecution was not simply targeting him anymore. They were systematically trying to tear apart everything he had built. The evidence, the witnesses, they were all adding up to a picture of corporate malpractice and deceit. Wright's testimony was just the latest strike in a battle Musk had never anticipated. West tried to salvage the situation by cross-examining Wright. He attempted to poke holes in the man's story, to suggest that Wright was merely a disgruntled employee with a grudge. But every question he asked seemed to make Wright's accusations even more credible. The documents Wright referred to were detailed, precise, and aligned with much of the evidence the prosecution had already presented. West's frustration mounted. If he couldn't break Wright's story, he needed to find a way to expose the prosecution's agenda. Was this truly about justice, or was it about bringing down one of the most influential entrepreneurs of the modern era? As the afternoon wore on, West realized that he had little time left to recover. The jury was on edge, and every word from Wright felt like it was driving a nail into Musk's coffin. Just as things were looking their darkest, a glimmer of hope appeared. Musk's defense team had been quietly reviewing the documents Wright had referred to, and they had uncovered something. In one of the key financial documents that Wright had shown the court, there was a glaring inconsistency, a mistake in the numbers that had not been mentioned by Wright. If it was truly a mistake, it could expose the entire case as one based on faulty information. West wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. He had just been handed a potential lifeline. The trial wasn't over yet, Musk was still in the fight, and he was determined to win. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the day's session drew to a close. The air was thick with tension, and the murmur of voices only amplified the growing uncertainty. Musk's legal team had been handed a potential lifeline, a mistake in the financial documents Wright had presented. But would it be enough to turn the tide in their favor? And more importantly, would it be enough to convince the jury of Musk's innocence? Cameron West paced the floor of the defense strategy room, his mind racing as he mulled over the document he had just discovered. The inconsistency in Wright's financial documents was glaring. A calculation error that could prove the whole case against Musk was built on faulty evidence. West knew this was his chance to expose the prosecution's case for what it was, a house of cards waiting to collapse. But as he sat down to examine the issue more closely, a new thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't just an error? What if it was a deliberate manipulation of the evidence? In the prosecution's corner, Catherine Dunn sat at her desk, reviewing her notes. The day's events had shaken her, but she had maintained her composure. Wright's testimony had been a game-changer, and she had no doubt that the jury would be swayed by his direct involvement in Musk's operations. However, the defense's objection to his testimony had caused a ripple in her confidence. The potential inconsistency in the documents Wright presented was troubling. Was this just a mistake, or had Wright been careless in his presentation? Dunn's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a name she hadn't expected, Jennifer Carson. "Hello." Dunn answered, her voice professional. "Catherine," Carson's voice came through, strained and hesitant. "I need to talk to you about something." Dunn's eyebrows furrowed. "What is it?" Carson paused, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I've been thinking about everything. About the trial, about what I said. And I'm not sure anymore." Dunn felt a twinge of alarm. "Not sure about what?" "About my testimony," Carson confessed. I think I may have overstated things. Some of it wasn't exactly how I remember it. I didn't lie, but I might have misrepresented some of the details. The stuff about the fraud. I don't know anymore if I can stand by all of it." The words hit Dunn like a cold slap to the face. Carson, the star witness, was now having doubts. Was this a moment of genuine remorse, or was Carson trying to distance herself from the case because she feared it was falling apart? "Jennifer, what are you saying?" Dunn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm saying I don't want to be part of something I don't believe in. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I'm not so sure." Dunn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. If Carson was truly retracting her testimony, it could be disastrous for the prosecution. She had been their linchpin, the person who had painted Musk as a fraudster. If Carson couldn't back up her claims, the entire case would lose its foundation. Dunn quickly ended the call, her mind spinning. She needed to think, to strategize, but one thing was clear, she had to make sure Carson's doubts didn't reach the jury. The next morning, West was ready. He had reviewed the documents again, and the error in Wright's financial report was undeniable. It wasn't just a minor discrepancy, it was a glaring mistake that could unravel the entire narrative the prosecution had built. West knew he had to bring it to the jury's attention before the prosecution could bury it. The moment had arrived for him to launch his counterattack. As Wright took the stand once again, West stood up with a quiet determination. He walked slowly toward the witness box, his eyes fixed on Wright. "Mr. Wright," West began, his voice calm but piercing, "I want to revisit the financial documents you presented to this court. You mentioned earlier that you had direct knowledge of financial manipulation at Tesla. But what we didn't address was a key issue in the numbers you presented." The courtroom was silent as West pulled up a large screen behind him. The document in question was displayed in front of everyone, showing the same financial report Wright had referenced in his earlier testimony. "There's a clear error here," West continued, pointing to a calculation on the screen. "The numbers in this report don't add up. You stated that Tesla's earnings were manipulated to boost stock prices, but this figure doesn't match the actual financials. It's a mathematical mistake. A mistake that you failed to mention when you presented this evidence." Wright's face tightened, and the jury leaned forward in anticipation. West's voice grew firmer. "Mr. Wright, you've testified under oath that you witnessed these fraudulent activities firsthand. But here we have proof that the key document you've relied on is inaccurate. And this isn't the first time. You've made several mistakes in the financials you've presented today. How do you explain this inconsistency?" The room was heavy with tension. Wright shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I don't know. It must have been a mistake. A mistake, West repeated, his tone skeptical. Is that your defense? That a critical document you've presented to this court was just a mistake? Wright hesitated. His confidence was beginning to crack. Yes. It seems that way, he muttered, visibly flustered. West turned to the jury, his gaze steady. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a witness whose entire testimony is based on flawed and erroneous evidence. Mr. Wright has not only failed to provide accurate documentation, but he has also failed to substantiate his claims. His credibility is now in question. The impact was immediate. The jury members exchanged glances, some of them furrowing their brows. West could see the shift, the subtle change in their expressions. The prosecution's case, once so certain, was now beginning to unravel. Despite the setback, Dunn wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't afford to lose her star witness. As the day wore on, she began her own questioning of Wright. But the damage had already been done. Every time she tried to bring the focus back to Musk's alleged crimes, the jury's eyes seemed to drift back to the errors in the documents. It was as though the shadow of doubt had taken root in their minds. When court adjourned for the day, West caught Musk's eye. They exchanged a silent understanding. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, Musk felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning. The prosecution's case had weaknesses, and West had found them. As Musk left the courthouse, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. There was a message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it. It was from Jennifer Carson. I've changed my mind, the message read. I'm willing to testify again, but only if we can clear the air. I don't want to be part of something that's gone too far. I'll explain everything. Musk's heart skipped a beat. Was this a genuine change of heart? Or was there something more to this unexpected offer? Whatever it was, Musk knew one thing for certain: the case was far from over. The next morning, the courtroom was unusually quiet as the judge entered, his gavel ringing through the stillness. The prosecution and defense teams were already seated, and the weight of the previous day's events hung heavily in the air. It was clear that things were no longer as straightforward as they had seemed just a few days ago. The prosecution's case had been rocked by Wright's inconsistencies, and now there was the strange twist of Jennifer Carson's sudden willingness to testify again. Cameron West sat at the defense table, reviewing the message from Carson one more time. He knew that this new development was both an opportunity and a risk. Carson's reappearance could serve as a powerful rebuttal to Wright's claims, but could she be trusted after her earlier retraction? And more importantly, would her testimony shift the jury's perception in Musk's favor, or would it only add further confusion to an already muddled case? The defense had been expecting a smoother path after Wright's errors came to light, but now this was a new variable they hadn't accounted for. West's instincts told him this was a gamble, one that Musk was willing to take, despite the risks. As the court session began, Dunn stood up with a confident air. She had regained some of her composure after the previous day's questioning of Wright. The errors in the financial documents were troubling, but she still believed in the strength of her case. She had to keep pushing forward. The prosecution wasn't about to back down. Your Honor, Dunn said, her voice clear and authoritative, the prosecution has a new witness to present, one who was crucial in the early stages of this investigation. We request permission to recall Jennifer Carson to the stand. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was as though the room collectively held its breath. No one had expected Carson to come back after her dramatic retraction. But here she was, willing to testify once again. West was on his feet instantly, objecting. Your Honor, the defense has serious concerns about the reliability of this witness. She has already stated that she misrepresented key details of her testimony. To bring her back now would undermine the integrity of the trial. Judge Harper's expression was unreadable as he turned toward Dunn. I'll allow it, but the jury will be informed of her previous retraction. Let's proceed. A hush fell over the courtroom as Jennifer Carson took the stand once more. She looked different than she had in the days before. Her posture was straighter, her expression more serious. She was about to be a pivotal figure in this trial, and it was clear that the weight of her decision was not lost on her. Dunn approached her, ready to guide her through the testimony. "Ms. Carson," Dunn began, "you've agreed to return to the stand today. Can you explain to the court why you decided to testify again?" Carson's eyes met the jury's, and for a moment, her voice wavered. She was clearly nervous. "I've had some time to think about everything. At first, I was unsure about the details. I thought I might have been mistaken about certain things, but after careful reflection, I realized that what I saw, and what I know, is the truth." West's eyes narrowed as Carson continued. "I saw Mr. Musk's actions, firsthand. I witnessed the manipulation of financial reports, the pressure to hide the true state of things. I was a part of that world, and I can't turn my back on the truth anymore." The jury listened intently, but there was a subtle change in their demeanor. Carson's words were measured, and she seemed more composed this time. Yet there remained an air of uncertainty. Would the jury believe her this time, after her earlier retraction? Or would they view her as just another witness with an unreliable account? West knew he had to act quickly. He needed to undermine Carson's credibility before her testimony could do too much damage. West stood, his gaze fixed on Carson. "Ms. Carson, you've stated that you've reconsidered your previous testimony. You've admitted to some inaccuracies, but you're now claiming that you witnessed financial manipulation at Tesla. Can you explain why you didn't come forward with this information sooner?" Carson's face reddened slightly. I didn't understand the full scope of what was going on at first. It wasn't until I left Tesla and started looking at things from the outside that I realized the extent of the wrongdoing." West wasn't buying it. "But you've worked closely with Mr. Musk for years. How could you not have seen the manipulation if you were so deeply involved in the company's operations?" Carson hesitated. I don't have a perfect explanation. I just know what I saw." West's voice grew sharper. "So, let me get this straight. You're claiming to have witnessed serious corporate fraud, but you waited until now to speak up, after months of legal proceedings and pressure from the prosecution?" Carson's voice faltered. She was beginning to look uncomfortable under West's questioning. "I didn't know how to process it at the time. I was just following orders, but now I realize I was wrong to stay silent." West pressed further, sensing that the cracks in her story were widening. "And now, after all this time, you're telling us that your recollections are suddenly clear? That everything you're saying now is the absolute truth?" Carson bit her lip, visibly struggling. I believe it is." West turned toward the jury, his voice laced with skepticism. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a witness who is not only unreliable but whose testimony has shifted drastically in the course of this trial. First, she claims to have been unsure, and now, she's suddenly certain. How can we trust anything she says?" The courtroom was tense. Carson's credibility was crumbling before their eyes, and West knew that he had planted a seed of doubt. If he could convince the jury that Carson's testimony was inconsistent and unreliable, he might be able to pull the rug out from under the prosecution's case. Just as West was finishing his cross-examination, a new development shook the courtroom. A man in a dark suit walked in, his face calm but urgent. It was Elon Musk's personal lawyer, Henry Jacobs, and he was carrying a stack of documents. "Your Honor," Jacobs said, approaching the bench, "we've just received some crucial information that may change the course of this trial." Judge Harper looked at Jacobs, clearly intrigued. "What is it, Mr. Jacobs?" Jacobs handed the documents to the judge, who scanned them quickly. Then, he nodded. "The court will recess for 15 minutes while I review this new evidence," Judge Harper announced. The room erupted into murmurs. What was this new evidence? Had the defense just uncovered something that could overturn the entire case? West turned to Musk, his expression one of cautious optimism. This was the moment they had been waiting for, a final push to shift the scales of justice in their favor. As the recess continued, West felt the weight of the moment. His mind raced with possibilities. The documents Jacobs had just presented could be the key to exposing a major flaw in the prosecution's case. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Musk sat beside him, his face unreadable. He had been through too much already to be caught off guard now. Whatever happened next, he knew it was going to be a defining moment in the trial. As the court prepared to reconvene, all eyes were on the defense. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, it felt as though they might just be turning the corner. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone took their seats, waiting for Judge Harper to address the unexpected evidence that had been presented. The 15-minute recess had seemed longer than it was, but now the moment had arrived. The future of the trial, and perhaps the future of Elon Musk, hung in the balance. Cameron West sat at the defense table, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the judge. Musk, on the other hand, appeared unusually calm for someone in his position. West couldn't help but admire the man's ability to remain composed under such intense scrutiny. But the stakes had never been higher, and the air in the room felt charged with anticipation. When the gavel struck and the room quieted, Judge Harper spoke, his voice commanding. After reviewing the documents presented by the defense, I find that we have a situation that requires further examination. The defense has uncovered what appears to be an additional set of emails, one that may offer a completely different perspective on the evidence we've already seen. These emails suggest a potential breach of protocol that could undermine the prosecution's argument. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. What breach? How could this evidence change everything? West stood slowly, taking in the weight of the moment. He could sense the shift in the room. This was the turning point. The jury was on edge, the prosecution was scrambling, and even the judge seemed uncertain about how to proceed. Your Honor, West began, his voice steady, I ask that we immediately introduce these emails into the record. These communications, which were discovered just yesterday, reveal that the key witness, Mr. Wright, may have been involved in actions that directly conflict with his testimony. Specifically, these emails show that Wright was complicit in the very activities he claimed to have witnessed, raising serious questions about his credibility. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. West knew this was a bold move. But it was one that could bring the case crashing down. The judge nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. We will allow these emails to be entered into evidence. Ms. Dunn, I suggest you review this information carefully before continuing your case. Dunn's face was a mask of controlled fury. She had been blindsided by this new development, and her mind was racing. If the emails contained what West had claimed, it could dismantle the prosecution's entire case. As the emails were displayed on the screen, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The emails, exchanged between Wright and a colleague at Tesla, contained details that painted Wright in a far more dubious light. They discussed methods of manipulating financial reports, not as a witness to them, but as an active participant. Dunn rose from her seat, her face pale. Objection, Your Honor. These emails are. Let's not interrupt the proceedings, Ms. Dunn, Judge Harper interrupted. We will allow this evidence to stand. West knew this was his chance. He pressed forward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice cutting through the tension, these emails provide direct evidence that the key witness against Elon Musk, Mr. Wright, was involved in the very crimes he claims to have witnessed. Not only does this make his testimony unreliable, but it shows that he was a participant in the manipulation he now accuses Mr. Musk of. This calls into question everything he has said in this courtroom. The jury was visibly reacting, some leaning forward, others exchanging uneasy glances. The once confident prosecution's case was beginning to unravel before their eyes. Wright, who had stood as the cornerstone of the allegations against Musk, now seemed to be nothing more than a hypocrite. Dunn was fuming. The last thing she had expected was this kind of betrayal. Wright had been her star witness, the one person who could turn the tide in their favor. Now, He was the very person whose actions could destroy their case. "Your Honor, with all due respect," Dunn began, her voice trembling with anger, "these emails are circumstantial at best. There is no proof that Mr. Wright was involved in any illegal activity. This is an attempt to discredit a witness based on hearsay." Judge Harper glanced at her, his expression stern. "Ms. Dunn, the emails speak for themselves. You are welcome to cross-examine the witness, but these communications will remain in evidence." West couldn't contain a small, triumphant smile. His instincts had been right. This was the moment that could break the prosecution's case. As the courtroom buzzed with a mix of disbelief and uncertainty, Dunn called for a brief recess to regroup. The stakes had changed, and she needed to figure out how to salvage whatever was left of her case. The damage had been done. During the recess, Dunn met with Wright and the rest of her team. The room was tense, and the silence was almost suffocating. Wright looked like a man who had just been exposed for a crime he hadn't anticipated. His confidence, which had been so steadfast on the stand, had evaporated. "This is a disaster," Wright muttered, pacing the room. "I didn't think those emails would come out. I didn't know they were in the system." Dunn shot him a cold glance. "How did we miss this? How could you have been involved in these activities and not tell us?" Wright shifted uncomfortably. I was trying to protect myself. I didn't think it would matter, not at this stage." Dunn's patience was thinning. "Now look where we are. This is over. If we don't find a way to handle this, we're done." She turned to the rest of her team. "We need to do damage control, and we need to do it fast. Our witness is compromised. But we can't let this trial end here. We need a new angle, a new approach." The court reconvened, and Dunn returned to the stand, visibly composed but simmering with anger. She called Wright back up to testify, but the damage had already been done. West was prepared, ready to pounce on any misstep. Dunn tried to reframe Wright's testimony, focusing on Musk's alleged actions, but the jury's eyes kept darting to Wright's email fiasco. It was clear that they no longer trusted him. The more she pushed, the more they recoiled. West's next move was crucial. He needed to keep the momentum on his side. "Mr. Wright," West began during cross-examination, his voice filled with calm authority, "can you explain why, despite being involved in the very activities you accuse Mr. Musk of, you didn't come forward sooner with this information?" Wright's answer was stammered and uncertain. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to hurt anyone." West smiled thinly. "Is that so? Or were you just trying to cover your tracks?" Wright looked like a man cornered, and the jury could sense it. The cracks in the prosecution's case were now visible for all to see. By the end of the day, the courtroom had shifted. The prosecution's one solid case was now riddled with uncertainty. The emails, Wright's inconsistencies, and the failure of the prosecution to respond effectively had caused a seismic shift in the trial's momentum. As the jury filed out to deliberate, there was a collective sense of disbelief in the air. The tables had turned, and it was clear that this trial was no longer about Musk's guilt, it was about whether the prosecution could salvage anything from the wreckage. Elon Musk sat silently, his eyes focused on the jury's exit. For the first time in this trial, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in weeks: hope. The courtroom was as silent as a tomb when the jury filed back into the room. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. After days of heated arguments, surprises, and revelations, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The defense had presented its case with a power that had rattled the prosecution, and now the jury held the fate of Elon Musk in their hands. Cameron West sat at the defense table, his back straight and his hands folded in front of him. His expression was unreadable, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. They had fought hard, and for the first time, he felt that the scales of justice were beginning to tip in their favor. He glanced at Musk, who sat beside him, his usual composure firmly in place, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of nervousness. Across the room, Dunn was a study in restraint. She had tried everything she could to salvage her case, but the cracks had been exposed. Her key witness, Wright, had faltered under the weight of the defense's evidence, and now, she was left with the daunting task of convincing the jury that Musk was still guilty, despite everything that had come to light. The foreman of the jury stood, his face solemn as he approached the judge's bench. Everyone in the room held their breath as Judge Harper gave a slight nod, signaling that the verdict was about to be delivered. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Judge Harper said, his voice steady, "have you reached a verdict?" The foreman glanced around the jury box before answering. "We have, Your Honor." The room was eerily still as the foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Harper. All eyes were on the judge as he unfolded the document and scanned its contents. A hush fell over the courtroom as he cleared his throat. On the charge of corporate fraud, Judge Harper began, his voice measured, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty." West exhaled sharply, and a ripple of disbelief spread through the room. It was done. After weeks of high-stakes drama, of relentless cross-examinations and bombshell revelations, the jury had spoken. Musk had been acquitted. Dunn's face was ashen. She stood frozen, unable to process the words that had just been spoken. Wright, sitting at the prosecution table, lowered his head in shame. The case that had seemed so airtight just days ago had crumbled, and with it, the hopes of securing a conviction against one of the most high-profile figures in the world. Musk, however, did not stand or show any overt sign of celebration. He simply nodded, his face expressionless, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. It was clear to West that this was not just a victory for Musk, it was a personal triumph, a vindication after everything he had endured. As the courtroom began to empty, the energy was electric. Reporters scrambled to get their questions in, eager to capture Musk's reaction to the verdict. West stood up, exchanging a brief, knowing look with his client. There was no need for words between them now. The result spoke for itself. Outside, a crowd had already gathered, their phones trained on Musk, hoping for a glimpse of the man who had just been acquitted of the charges. The media frenzy was inevitable, but for now, Musk walked through the throngs of reporters with calm confidence, flanked by his legal team. His demeanor suggested that he had been prepared for this outcome all along, but West knew that there had been moments of doubt, moments when Musk might have questioned whether justice would prevail. As they entered the elevator, Musk finally spoke. "You did it," he said simply, turning to West. "I couldn't have asked for a better team." West gave a small nod, his eyes meeting Musk's. "You did it, too. You stayed calm. You stayed focused. That's how we won this." Musk didn't respond immediately, instead looking out at the city skyline. "I didn't know what to expect," he said quietly. "The whole world was watching. But in the end, I just had to trust in the truth." West smiled. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from Musk, one that few people ever saw. But now, in the aftermath of the trial, the tension had finally started to dissipate. Musk had faced down an incredible legal battle and emerged victorious. The victory wasn't just about the acquittal. For Musk, it was about something deeper. It was about the toll that this trial had taken on him, the way it had challenged his sense of self, and the lengths to which he had gone to protect his reputation and his company. He had come out of this stronger, more resolved than ever. But he also knew that this battle had left its scars. The media would continue to circle, the public would continue to question, but the truth had been established. And that was something no one could take away from him. As West accompanied Musk to his car, he felt the weight of the journey. It had been a hard-fought battle, but in the end, the truth had won. There were no more legal obstacles in Musk's path, not now, not anymore. The legal system had worked as it was supposed to, it had tested the evidence, weighed the facts, and ultimately found that the charges against Musk didn't hold up. The two men stood by the car for a moment, as reporters continued to shout questions. Musk turned to West and gave him a firm handshake. "Thanks, Cameron. I owe you one." West smiled and nodded. We all owe each other. This is what we do, fight for the truth. As the world moved on, the trial of Elon Musk became a landmark case. The press would continue to dissect every aspect of the trial, analyzing the twists and turns, the highs and lows. But for Musk, the most important thing was that he had come out on top. He had faced an intense legal battle, and though the trial had taken its toll on him personally, it had reaffirmed his belief in the importance of perseverance. Cameron West, for his part, had earned a reputation as one of the best attorneys in the country. His victory in this case cemented his place in the legal world, and he knew that his career would never be the same again. He had handled the pressure, navigated the complexities of the trial, and delivered an outcome that few had expected. As for Musk, the world would continue to watch his every move. But after everything he had been through, there was one thing he knew for certain: the courtroom battle was over, and he had come out victorious. The courthouse doors slammed shut behind Elon Musk as he stepped out into the daylight. The media frenzy had not waned, even after the verdict. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust into his face. Questions bombarded him from every direction, but he didn't flinch. After everything he had just gone through, the chaos felt almost trivial. Musk knew that the real story had already been told, the truth was out, and the jury had made their decision. What followed was just noise. He gave a brief, well-practiced smile for the cameras before getting into the car waiting for him. Cameron West followed closely behind. The trial was over, but the weight of the victory was still settling in. As they drove away from the courthouse, West could see the look of quiet triumph on Musk's face. There was no celebration, no signs of relief, just a sense of closure. Musk had won, but it had come at a cost. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. Musk stared out of the window, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, but his mind seemed to be 1,000 miles away. West glanced at him and then at the rearview mirror, noting the same expression he had seen on Musk's face when the verdict had been read: stoic, almost cold. "It's over now," West said after a moment, his voice calm but firm. Musk nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I'm not sure it ever really feels over," he replied quietly. "Even after a victory like this, it lingers. People will still question. There will always be whispers. No matter how much you win, it's never really finished." West had known Musk for a long time, but this moment felt different. For all the successes Musk had experienced, for all the ways he had risen above challenges, it was clear this trial had taken a toll on him. The public scrutiny, the pressure, the endless accusations, it all weighed on him more than he cared to admit. "You can't control what others think," West said after a pause. "All you can do is stay true to yourself, and that's what you did. The truth came out. That's what matters." Musk gave a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not so sure. People don't always care about the truth. They care about the story. And sometimes, the story isn't the truth." West sat back in his seat, considering his words carefully. "Maybe. But the truth has a way of revealing itself in the end. You've proven that. This victory, it's not just about the case, it's about showing the world what you're made of. It's about standing your ground and not letting anyone define you." Musk glanced over at him, his expression softening slightly. "You're right," he said quietly. "But it's been exhausting. The constant battle, the endless fights. I'm just tired." West could see the vulnerability in Musk that had always been hidden behind the persona of the larger-than-life entrepreneur. The man who had built empires, launched rockets, and changed the world seemed, in that moment, very human. He wasn't just a visionary leader, he was a person who had endured incredible pressure, and it had left its mark. As they arrived at Musk's residence, the media horde was waiting. Reporters crowded the gates, eager to capture the next moment in the unfolding drama. Musk's bodyguard quickly ushered him inside, but before he disappeared into the house, he turned to West. "You did good work, Cameron," Musk said, his voice low but sincere. "I won't forget it." West smiled, but it wasn't his typical grin. This time, it was a smile of respect. "We all did," he replied. As Musk entered his home, West stood there for a moment, watching the chaos unfold around him. For a fleeting second, he wondered what it must be like to live in such a fishbowl, where every decision, every word, every action was under scrutiny. But he quickly dismissed the thought. His job was done. Musk had his freedom, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Elon Musk held a brief press conference at his headquarters. The room was packed with journalists, cameras ready to capture every word. Musk sat at the front, his posture relaxed but his expression focused. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady but carrying a weight of experience. "I stand here today not just as someone who has been acquitted of charges, but as someone who has had the privilege to defend the truth. This case was never just about me. It was about the principles of fairness, justice, and transparency. What happened here was a reminder of how important it is to trust in the legal system, to trust that, in the end, the truth will rise above the noise." Musk paused, allowing the room to absorb his words. The reporters were on the edge of their seats, waiting for him to continue. "Throughout this ordeal, I learned a lot about the power of resilience," Musk continued. "I've faced challenges in business, in life, and in the public eye, but nothing compares to the kind of scrutiny and pressure I've experienced over these past few months. But I believe this case has shown that no matter how powerful the forces against you may seem, if you remain true to your values, justice will prevail." His eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of a few reporters. "Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions." The questions came fast and furious, but Musk handled them with his usual calm. He spoke about the trial, about his vision for the future, and about his commitment to continuing his work. But more than anything, his message was clear: he wasn't going anywhere. The trial was over, but Musk's journey was far from finished. As the press conference came to a close, Musk walked away from the podium with the same composed demeanor he had maintained throughout the trial. West stood off to the side, watching as Musk's team of advisors and public relations experts gathered around him. The public may have been obsessed with the spectacle of the trial, but Musk's focus had already shifted to the next challenge, the next frontier. There was no time for rest. Musk had always been one to look ahead, to think beyond the present moment. This trial was just another battle won, but the war was far from over. There were rockets to launch, innovations to create, and dreams to chase. As West watched Musk leave the press room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This trial had been a defining moment, not just for Musk, but for the legal team who had fought tooth and nail for him. They had all been part of something bigger than themselves, a victory that went beyond the courtroom. And as West walked out into the bright sunlight, he couldn't help but wonder what the next chapter of Elon Musk's story would bring. Whatever it was, he knew one thing for sure: it would be nothing short of extraordinary. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?